Here are the top 5 things I wish I had known before I started CRNA school. My name is David Warren. Welcome back to this week's video. I'm a current nurse anesthesia resident out at National University on the West Coast. I want to jump right into it. These are the top 5 things I really wish I had known before I dove into the realm of nurse anesthesia. I've got my iPad here, so I'm going to intermittently look down so I don't miss anything. Number one, what I wish I had known, really off the top of the list, number one biggest thing is, will I have independent CRNA rotations? Will I have independent CRNA rotations? This is something that is just vitally important, and you don't really get the importance of it until you're in the middle of rotations, and it could be too late. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So, um, there are a few different practice models that CRNAs can practice in. CRNAs can practice under the supervision of a physician anesthesiologist, or CRNAs can practice independently. And so I want to give you an example of why this is so important and why this is something that needs to be on your radar from day one. At my second clinical rotation, I was out in West Texas. It was a CRNA only site. And there were a few different schools at this site, including my school. And just for some background, at National University, like 90% of our clinical rotations are independent CRNA only practices. And I kind of took that for granted because I didn't really know what all that entailed or what that meant. But at this particular rotation, whenever I'd been there for a few weeks, and whenever a new resident would come in from a different program, the clinical coordinator would have the current residents there do like an orientation day, like run a few cases with a new resident coming in. And so I'd been there for a few weeks, new residents were coming in. So the clinical coordinator was like, hey, we've got a couple new residents coming in. Can they shadow you for 4 hours in the morning? They're going to do their own cases in the afternoon. And just a little more background on this particular clinical site, very independent. So you're doing the cases yourself. The CRNAs are completely hands-off. They may or may not come in the room on induction and then emergency and extubation. You're doing the pre-op assessment yourself. You're coming up with a plan for anesthesia yourself. You're doing literally everything yourself. And they don't stay in the room. They might pop in on induction depending on the CRNA, but then they're out. And if you have problems or something, you can call them or text them, but you're doing everything by yourself. And so they had the residents that were there currently do again, a several hour type of orientation, watch us run a few cases just to kind of get the flow, see where things are and that sort of thing. So I met the new residents the next morning. They were going to watch me do a couple cases, and I was showing them, where the pre-op area is, kind of what we go through when we do pre-ops here, where the supply closet is, where the medication rooms are, if you need to get this, where it's at, equipment, all those things. So we're kind of going through that. And then kind of randomly, one of the nurse anesthesia residents asked me, who pushes the induction drugs? And that kind of caught me off guard a little bit. I was like, what do you mean who pushes the induction drugs? You push the induction, you do everything. You may or may not have anybody come in there with you. You're probably going to be by yourself. You push the induction drugs, you do the intubation, you do everything, period. There's nobody else there. And so that really kind of highlighted in my mind, there are other programs out there where you don't push your own induction drugs. And that kind of, I went further down this rabbit hole, and there are a lot of programs out there where you're trained and you don't push your own induction drugs. And that just kind of mind boggled me for a second. It's wait, why would you not do that? And it's just a completely different mindset than what the program that I'm in focuses on. And so that's just an example. Ask during your interview, or whenever you're filtering out these programs, ask, do you have independent CRNA rotations? And if so, how many? Because a lot of the programs that I have talked to, or people or residents that I've talked to in other programs, they say, oh yeah, we may have one rotation that's CRNA only. Whereas the program that I'm at, 90% of them are CRNA only. I've done one rotation where it's not CRNA only, where it's supervised practice, and it still is very hands-off. So just know that going in, that there's a lot of the dynamic that you don't know about. You don't know what you don't know. And I didn't know this. I had been an NP for 8 years, and I didn't know that people push your own induction drugs for you in some programs, in heavily medically directed supervised sites. So just know that going in, ask about the independent rotation thing, because that is vitally important. I'm going to leave that there. Okay. Number 2, will there be other learners at my sites competing for numbers? Will there be other learners at my sites competing for numbers? Meaning, will there be other CRNA programs there with multiple people Are you going to have trouble getting your numbers at that site? Or will there be medical residents, physician residents at that site in anesthesia who are competing for the numbers? They're going to be doing all the big vascular cases and the thoracic cases and all of the hearts and everything. Are you going to get any of that? They're going to be doing all the central lines. They're going to be doing all the A lines. Just ask these questions in your interview. Like, will there be other people at this site with me who are also going to be competing for the same numbers that I need to get to graduate? And it's funny because I didn't know these, even like you would think like I would have a background in advanced practice, like I would know some of this stuff, and I didn't. So just take note that will there be other learners at your site competing for the same numbers that you need to get? If there are, what's the method for dealing with that? Like, are you allowed a certain number of cases? Are you allowed to do these cases because you need these numbers to graduate? Just find those little small things out, those things that seem small that really aren't so small when you get into the environment and you're getting close to graduation. You're like, I need more X, Y, and Z, and I don't have it yet. And that's the thing that I ran into at my last site. It was a level 1 trauma center. Like, they did every case there. And there were seniors that were like 3 weeks away from graduation who came to this site because they didn't have all of their PEDS numbers. And they'd been in a program for 3 years. And it's like, you're at the end of your rotation, you're 2 weeks away and you still don't have all your numbers. So just ask those types of questions going in. Like, will there be other people? Will I have adequate case numbers? If there are other people, what's the plan to make sure that we get our numbers required? And a pointed question you can ask about that is, what's the average case volume that people from your program graduate with? That's a very good question. It should be greater than about 1,200 to 2,000 is way above the national average. And that's where you need to be. And so yeah, just leave it at that. You need to find out, are there going to be other learners competing for your numbers? If so, what's the plan to make sure you get your numbers so you can graduate on time? All right, number 3, what are the average case numbers throughout the entire program? Kind of segueing into what we just talked about. What are the average case numbers throughout the entire program? So I don't know it specifically off the top of my head. I'm trying to remember. Don't quote me on this for sure, but I want to say, after looking at my Typhon, which is what we use to log our cases, 2,000 hours is what you need, like minimum, to graduate, and you need 650 cases, like total cases, to graduate. Obviously, there are specialty numbers, like you got to have so many peds, you got to have so many thoracic, heart, all that stuff. But for a big total, like 650 cases is like the bare minimum that you have to have. And so you need to find out, whenever you're interviewing or whenever you're considering going to certain programs, how many cases do people that graduate from that program, how many cases do they have? And what's that number? And is it greater than 650? Are the people graduating from the program barely hitting that 650 mark? So find that out in advance as well. These are all very good questions to ask in your interview whenever you're interviewing for CRNA school, because they're going to give you an opportunity at the end to say, do you have any questions for us? These are the 5 questions you need to ask. What are your average case numbers? And apart from case numbers, what are your average like arterial line insertion numbers? What are your average central lines? What are your average regional blocks? Because the minimum to graduate is significantly lower than what most people from like independent programs will graduate with. And where I'm at National is a highly independent focused program. We graduate with way more numbers than than the bare minimum than what we need. And so ask those questions going in, especially about your case numbers. That kind of ties back into the last point, but just get a rough idea of case number wise, what's average, what can you expect? All right. Number 4, will I be proficient at regional anesthesia? Will I be proficient at regional anesthesia? And this is an interesting question because there are a lot of CRNAs that I work with now as my preceptor that weren't proficient at regional anesthesia when they graduated. They had to do some extra, they had to go take an extra ultrasound course, or they had to brush up on regional, do a lot of regional at different sites to kind of get comfortable with it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's good to ask that question in your interview, like, how proficient at regional will I be, or what kind of regional opportunities will I be? And I'll give you some examples. So most programs have what's called a regional rotation, meaning you do like 6 weeks or 12 weeks just doing regional anesthesia, and that's it. Like, you're just doing your 6 weeks of regional anesthesia. And some of the programs that I've ran into do that. They have a regional rotation, which is good. However, are you getting regional experience outside of your regional rotation? And I'm including in my regional skills like spinals, epidurals, and peripheral nerve blocks. So I know neuraxial anesthesia is not considered a regional technique. It's neuraxial anesthesia, but just for the sake of this, I'm going to kind of include it in there. So find out, like, do you get more than a regional rotation? Do you get more than 6 weeks? Because what's going to happen is you're going to do your regional rotation for 6 weeks. You're going to be really good at doing all your nerve blocks, like your supraclavs, your axillary blocks, your interscalenes, your adductors, your popliteals, all of those blocks that are like super common bread and butter. You're going to be really good at those. But then after you get out of your rotation and, for the next year and a half, if you don't touch another ultrasound machine, you don't do another regional anesthetic, you're not going to be very good at it. And so just like from what I've seen, anesthesia is very much headed in the regional heavy direction, meaning things are going to that more than they are doing generals or, anything like that. We're trying to find a regional for anything we can do it for. And if you work in a busy ortho service, you're going to be doing a lot of regional. You're going to be doing a lot of spinals, and then you're going to be doing a lot of blocks. And so get comfortable with doing that. So find out, what does a regional anesthesia rotation look like? I can tell you at National, the program that I'm at, we don't have a regional rotation. We don't have a dedicated like 6 weeks to just do regional, but we pick up regional at every site that we go to. So I'm in my senior year now. I just started my senior year. So after roughly like 10 months of clinical, I've got about 130 nerve blocks right now, plus about 50 spinals and about 20 epidurals. So, and that's good. That's like to graduate, just for reference, I'm not sure on the spinals and epidurals, to graduate for peripheral nerve blocks, you need like 15 or 16, maybe 20 max. And you got to have way more than that to be proficient. And even like now that after I've gotten 130 something, I still don't feel proficient. Like I feel like I need more. So just know like what those regional requirements look like for that particular program that you're wanting to go to. Like what kind of experience are you going to get? Are you doing a single rotation? Are you going to get to do more than just one rotation? So ask those questions as well, because that will kind of make or break depending on where you go. Like if you're going to go work in an outpatient surgery center doing only ortho surgery, then yeah, absolutely, you're going to need to brush up on a regional somewhere if you didn't get a lot of it in your program. There are courses out there that you can take after you graduate, but if you're paying almost $100,000 in tuition, I would expect your anesthesia school to teach you regional anesthesia and be proficient at it. And this kind of ties back into am I going to have independent rotations? At non-independent rotations, i.e. physician supervised sites, there are not going to be a lot of opportunities for blocks. Like the physicians are going to take all the blocks and you're going to be doing the spinal and then, the anesthesia in the operating room. You're not going to be doing the blocks. So ask these questions because these will come up later in your career. And I didn't know this until I got into the program that these were like that important. So find out about the regional. It kind of ties into everything. And then last but not least, number 5, will I rotate through multiple clinical sites or will I have a home clinical site? And this is kind of important just for traveling and logistic purposes. It doesn't really make a huge difference. There are good and bad on both sides. So in my program, or where I'm at National, we travel everywhere for our rotations. We don't have a home clinical site. We're on the move every 12 weeks, going somewhere different. There are good things about that. I will list those briefly. The good things are if you're in a site where maybe there's some conflicting personalities or people that you don't get along with, you're out in 12 weeks. You don't have to worry about it. Another good thing is you get to see how anesthesia is practiced across multiple state lines. You're not just staying in one area and seeing how one group of people do things. You're getting to go to multiple different sites over 2 years to see a wide range of how people do things, and you get to learn that yourself. The bad part is you're traveling every 12 weeks. You're on the move every 12 weeks. You're trying to find housing every 3 months. It gets expensive and it's frustrating, literally not knowing where you're going to go until 3 months in advance and then going 3 months later. So it's frustrating in that regard, but there are good sides to it. And this is just a good thing to know before you go to CRNA school. Like, am I going to have a home base where I'm doing the majority of my clinical rotations at this one hospital? And then I'm doing like offsite rotations, for like 12 weeks at another rotation. I'm doing my regional rotation for 6 weeks somewhere else. Find that out. Or am I going to be in one location the entire time? Or am I going to be traveling? So just find that out ahead of time. Again, it doesn't make a huge difference. Like, you're going to get good experience either way, but it's just good to know. Like, you don't want to get a year and a half into the program and then find out, oh, I'm going to be traveling every 12 weeks. Like when I applied to National, I knew I was going to be traveling every 12 weeks. They made it very clear in my interview, like there's no home clinical site. Like, you're on the go every 12 weeks. You have to go with like little to no notice and be ready. And I was okay with that. Again, there are good things and bad things about that, and I was overall okay with that. But just know, like, what does that look like for your program? Are you okay? Do you have a family? Do you have kids? It's going to be tough to go every 12 weeks. Do you want a home clinical site? Think about all of those things before you like pull the trigger on accepting somewhere, accepting an invitation to go to CRNA school. So those are the top 5 things that I wish I had known before I started anesthesia school. Just to recap: number one, will I have independent CRNA rotations? Number two, will there be other learners at my sites competing for my numbers? Number three, what are the average case numbers through the entire program? Number four, will I be proficient in regional anesthesia? And number five, will I rotate through multiple clinical sites or have a home clinical site? Comment below. Let me, if you're a CRNA or your current nurse anesthesia resident, comment below. Let me know what you wish you had known prior to starting anesthesia school. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.